Disaster has become the new normal, so when things are no worse than they had been before, it almost feels as if a corner has been turned. Words from our guest that perfectly describe the absurdity in today's world and politics. While the news could be depressing, satire offers a more lighthearted and accessible approach. Crace, our guest, is known for dissecting literature and politics through his parliamentary sketches for The Guardian for over a decade.
Today, we're going to look at his journey from a turbulent personal life to becoming one of the most influential parliamentary sketch writers in the UK.
We're going to explore the creative process of writing sketches. We're looking at the importance of satire for democracy and also, of course, get some takes on UK politics from someone who's in Westminster each day. So please give a warm welcome to Crace.
Where would you like me to sit?
Sit down here, yeah. Thank you. Well, welcome to our couches, Mr. Crace.
Oh, thank you. They're very comfy.
Yeah, right. You're known for your digested reads, among others.
Yeah.
Column. It's a column in The Guardian where you humorously summarize books and criticize them with a satirical twist. At least you did that a while ago. But you only started writing in your 30s. So maybe could you give us a digest of your life before you became an author and writer?
The simple reason, the simple reason that I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I went to university in England at Exeter, and then did a postgraduate degree at the London School of Economics. And I had planned to be an academic if I could, but I realised that I was too stupid. Which was a kind of big disappointment to me. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of had mental health problems and drug problems, and I just drifted from job to job until I kind of got my act together in my 30s. And I only started writing in my 30s because that was one of the few things that I thought you didn't have to explain a 10-year gap in your CV. Mm-hmm. You could either do it or you couldn't. And when I started writing, I just sort of sent, I'd ring up that was in the days before email. Mm-hmm. So, you had to get the number of a commissioning editor, a features editor or whatever, ring them up, and if you managed to catch them, you would say, how do you feel about a piece like that? And they would say, well, if you go away and write it, I'll consider it. So that's how I started. Mm-hmm. And then obviously once you've got a track record, then sort of things snowballed after that.
Yeah.
And journalism is often perceived as an unstable career, with very few journalists making a full-time position. After such a turbulent time, why did you still choose to pursue that path?
I guess I was naive, I think, because I didn't know how difficult it was. And I was also very lucky because literally the first piece I wrote got published in a national newspaper. Yeah. And thereafter, I've never been out of work. People just liked the way I wrote and they liked my ideas. And it was also, I can't stress too much how different journalism was back then.
Yeah.
Because print journalism was massive. Because, there was no internet, there was no online media. There wasn't even rolling 24-hour television news when I started. There was just some news bulletins in the evening.
Would you say journalism was easier back then?
It still fell hard, but there were lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
And I took a very commercial view of what I was doing. Obviously, any journalist sort of when they start wants to start at the top. Yeah. Doing the big features, the big interviews, the big political stories. And I kind of realized I'd get one or two of those a year, which was sort of unsustainable financially. I needed to make a living. So I kind of went for the softer areas where, I mean, The Guardian had a lot, back in those days, we had a lot of public sector adverts, job adverts, and there were supplements which and they didn't have enough staff writers to write for them. So I sort of would write 3 or 4 pieces a week for the supplements because I was doing the jobs that the full-time Guardian journalist didn't want to do. And, you know, so I kind of picked up, I kind of learnt a friend of mine told me that the first 250,000 words that any journalist writes are rubbish. But the trick is to get someone to pay for them. And so that by the time you've got them under your belt, you know, you haven't been sort of writing sort of 250 sort of meaningless pieces that go nowhere, because I think that would be soul destroying for anyone, really.
Yeah. And as you said, you did maybe not bring much experience to the table. In some interviews, you even said that the Independent may have just accepted your first article because they mistook you for Jim Crace.
Yeah.
Did you ever have imposter syndrome?
I just took what was going, really. I kind of only realised later that it was that they might have mistaken me for, I don't know if you've heard of an English writer called Jim Crace. He was very well known back in the early 1990s, and I only kind of realised when I when I pitched my second piece after they'd run it, that they were paying me half of what they'd paid me for the first one. Yeah, they found out quite quickly that I wasn't Jim. But by then it was sort of too late. I was sort of in, and they couldn't very well say, ta-ra. Yeah, that also they couldn't really admit, because it would look pretty piss poor to them to admit that they hadn't known who I was.
So given your lack of experience in writing, you started in the education section, but soon enough your specialty became satire. How did that happen?
I suppose all my writing has had a light touch throughout that. I mean, my family would think I'm quite miserable, but maybe, you know, the humour finds itself. And I would find sort of ways of even making what seemed like fairly boring topics kind of interesting. And so, and this was where, having sort of spent a lot of time in The Guardian writing for lesser supplements, it meant that I got to know other commissioning editors around the building. And, you know, they kind of liked me. They gave me a chance. And so, yeah, my big break was with the digested read.
Yeah.
But that was a kind of one-off, because, I mean, it was a weird kind of experience, because when I was given the job, or, you know, the column, no one had any idea what it was really going to turn out into, least of all me. And it was only in the first sort of 3 or 4 months of writing it and exploring it that I kind of realised that the possibilities of kind of humour and taking it sort of further. And you know, that column kept going for 19 years, up until the time when I said, I just can't manage. I mean, British politics, which we'll get on to, was, you know, a sort of psychodrama disaster area. And I just didn't have the bandwidth to read a book a week and to do it. But I still do it, you know, for fun now and again. I mean, most recently I did the Boris Johnson autobiography, which I would advise anyone thinking of reading it not. You just don't bother. It's, as you might expect, full of errors and far too long, and most unforgivably, it's really boring.
Yeah. And you already said you needed kind of to develop your style maybe in digested reads and find out how to make it your own. And especially in parliamentary sketch writing now, you've stepped into a really old tradition and into the footsteps also of Simon Hoggart. So how did you make sketch writing your own?
Well, I mean, I had done some parliamentary satire before for The Guardian as well. I'd done a weekly column called Westminster Digested, and in which I would imagine the conversations that the politicians, that I kind of thought they were having, and it was a sort of 600 words, and it was a distillation of the week, but with a kind of sort of, with including all the screw-ups and the kind of humour, and also the things that you thought you kind of know that politicians must be saying, or must be thinking, even though what they're saying is probably, I mean, they're never as certain. Politics, certainly in Britain, I don't know so much about here, is very binary. Politicians say this is the thing that we're doing and this is right, and most of the time they don't really know. They're giving it a good guess.
Yeah.
And especially when you're talking about the Prime Minister, because the easy decisions get made at departmental level. So it's only the things that are really, really complicated and difficult, and which, you're juggling with probabilities, that get sort of passed upwards to that. And I mean, so I was surprised when I was off, but I was still surprised because there are only 4 parliamentary sketch writers in the UK. So you would be very foolish to have built your whole career saying, I'm going to become a parliamentary sketch writer.
Yeah.
I mean, because in essence, for me, there was only one job, because I'm left of centre, The Guardian's left of centre, and the other sketch writers for the Daily Telegraph, the Times, and the Daily Mail, they are all right of centre, and they wouldn't have me, and I wouldn't have them. So really, I've landed in the only place possible.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, to start with, it was just a question of finding my own voice, really. I didn't want to end up as a pastiche of Simon Hoggart, to try and parody him or imitate him, just to kind of find my own language, really. Does everyone know what a parliamentary sketch is? Yeah, okay, well, we seem to be at one with that. I kind of also, I wanted it to be more surreal, but also at another level more serious too, because a lot of sketches tend to be just sort of kind of passing sort of diversions, if I mean, of something quite trivial. Whereas in my sketches, I wanted to be kind of telling the narrative of the day, what's really going on in politics, but through the prism of satire. And to really kind of hold some, power to account. And there have been times when it's felt almost as if I was the unofficial opposition to the Tory party.
Yeah.
I mean, not so much in recent years, but from about 2015 through to 2019, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, so many people, I mean, the Tories never took him seriously. And, well, and also the British public never took him seriously. He was never, ever going to be elected Prime Minister. And so I kind of felt that the sketch had to hold up the mirror, really, that he was often failing to do.
Yeah, and to hold politicians accountable, of course, you need to see all the inconsistencies and pay attention to the detail. That must also really hone your focus. Does that change the way you will the world in general?
No, I mean, I think the other role of the sketch is to be a kind of institutional memory, because so many politicians change their mind, things move on, and it's very easy to forget the narrative, where you've come from, what these people were saying just 2 years ago. They rely on people having a kind of memory churn, really, so that people don't remember what they said to them. And so I always kind of feel the sketch should be going, oh, hold on a minute, this is the man that said, Brexit was going to be a success, and, let's have a look at it. I can tell you it isn't. I've just been in a passport queue for an hour, which is why we're starting slightly late. I personally don't think I value I wasn't standing in that queue thinking, thank God for British sovereignty,
Do you ever find it hard to decide what to focus on in the news when it's packed with just so much insanity?
Yeah, I mean, that is often the hardest part of the day, really, is trying to work out what I am going to sketch. What will be both entertaining, but more than that, what will be informative, what is kind of driving the day, even at a kind of subliminal level, really. You have to kind of work it. I mean, some days it's obvious, and like last Monday, I knew there was going to be a statement on Syria, with the fall of Bashar al-Assad. And I kind of thought, you might think, how do you make fun of that? But in a way, it was so quite easy, because I don't know, here we had the kind of level of self-importance of many politicians, because in Britain, they often feel like something can't really be said to have happened until they've talked about it in Parliament. And so, you have to have a whole lot of people who know nothing about Syria, really, and hadn't really given it a moment's thought, suddenly devoting 90 minutes of the afternoon to, discussing a subject of great importance, but as if the people of Syria are hanging on their every word. And I'd be willing to bet that in Damascus, they weren't really waiting for the British Foreign Secretary to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
So in your latest book, Taking the Lead, it's not you looking at the world, but it's from the perspective of your dog, Herbie.
Yeah.
What do readers gain from experiencing the world through that perspective?
Well, I mean, I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be unusual. And it started with a simple thought, where you kind of looking back on the last 10 years of British politics, it was very much the feeling, my dog could have done better than that. And then I kind of thought about it for a bit, and then I kind of thought, my dog is 13 years old, and so he's been around for all of this. And then I kind of thought that actually, in dog years, he's probably nearing 90, and he's only ever known a Tory government, and a chaotic Tory government at that. And I kind of thought, that's really sad. So I then decided, how would it be if I kind of positioned him as a character who had actually worked in Westminster for all these kind of politicians. And in a way, he serves as a kind of moral compass, really, in the way that sort of politicians and special advisors, you kind of know that as far as their own sort of integrity, it's fairly flaky a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But with a dog, you sort of know where you are. And I just thought it would be kind of really fun, kind of absurd. It's sort of like Paddington Bear for grown-ups, really.
Sounds great. You have written multiple well-received books now, but you have critiqued even more in your digested reads. Did that column change the way you yourself write your books?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it did. I mean, to go back to the digested read, the idea of it to start with was just to offer a précis of a main book of the week, the book of the week that is getting the most media of attention. Mm-hmm. It could be a really highbrow piece of literature, or it could be a celebrity memoir. I mean, it was sort of all were welcome, really. But I then realized that part of the way you could retell it was through parodying the style. So in a sense, you weren't just saying what was going on with the book. You were kind of, it was in a way a left field review at the same time, because you could tell from the stylistic, tics of the author, you could sort of reproduce that, in Technicolor, really. So it sort of changed the way I read for a while, because often, rather than just reading for pleasure, I would be reading to understand how the book was constructed, how it was put together, how it was written, and then kind of looking for the flaws, looking for what works and what the people, the writers that could handle plot. And also, I mean, one of the things that really became a bugbear was how bad most people write dialogue. Because they would sort of give you, a whole paragraph of uninterrupted, text, as if, and people don't talk like that. People sort of talk, they interrupt each other. They think, and obviously you don't want to put all the ums and the ahs in.
Yeah.
But, so I would have a lot of fun with that. But it did teach me sort of how to write, because it was it was like going back to school, like going back to university, if you like. And it was a kind of lesson that you don't really learn in university. I mean, you're told, in English departments, because I've gone back and talked to English departments about it, you're often talked about the importance of books and stuff like that, but almost as a sort of act of reverence, rather than as something that is sort of there for you to sort of kind of plunder the ideas. Some books are brilliant, but a lot of them aren't. Mm-hmm. And, even sort of classic works of literature become dated and, have their own tics. And in particular, I went back and I started, one other book that I wrote was The Digested Read of the 20th Century, where I took 10 books from each decade, the 1900s, 1910, 1920s, up to the 1990s. And, 10 books, 100 books that were classics, and did the same thing to them. Mm-hmm. And that was quite fun. And then I went back and sort of, I thought, could we do the same with Dickens? So I've gone back and done, and it became quite interesting, because you sort of saw with Dickens that it became an interest to see how he actually wrote the books, because he was often writing with a gun at his head. He didn't write, you know, David Copperfield as sort of one in sort of over a long period of time. He'd written the first 2 chapters, and then they would get published in the magazine. And then he was often having to write 5,000 words every month for, you know, to meet the next deadline. So because they were published in magazine format to start with. And you would kind of realize that actually some chapters were really condensed and really tight and really riveting. And you kind of thought, he knows that he's got a lot of plot that he's got to go through. He knows what he's doing at this bit. And you can go to other chapters and they are quite woolly. Yeah. And there are sort of long bits of description and not much happens. And you kind of think, and I then kind of thought, well, this is presumably because he didn't really know what he wanted to say at that particular time. So even the greats of the kind of English language, you know, they kind of obey the same laws of deadlines that the rest of us live.
Yeah. And zooming out a bit, satire has a very long history. What do you think is its importance in a democracy?
Well, I mean, it is about holding power to account. Mm-hmm. You know, it should also be entertaining. And I think it's about punching up rather than punching down as well. You know, so in my sketches, I will go for the government generally because they are the ones doing, the bad things. They are the ones making the decisions that affect us. I don't really want to spend 1,000 words taking the piss out of some backbencher because he or she really aren't that relative. They really aren't that integral. And I kind of feel that it should matter. It's an alternative history.
But how do you think satire can hold politicians accountable in ways that traditional media cannot?
I mean, I don't know what the libel laws are over here, but you can get away with a lot of stuff in England under the guise of satire. Now, there is, I was very happy calling Boris Johnson a liar, a convict, or, whatever. I used to make fun of Michael Gove. I would sketch him as a crackhead, and I would just sort of go into a sort of little riff about him going up to the top of his departmental building to sort of with his crack pipe, and if a news reporter had written that, the lawyers would put an ink through it, whereas with me, it just sort of got waved through.
So speaking about that, you've once said that sketch writing allows you to exaggerate, but also that you want to, quote, be fair to the people that you write about. How do you ensure, what does it mean to be fair, and how do you ensure being fair?
Well, it is pretty much my own gut feeling. I mean, I can't, I don't know whether I am always screwed. I try to be kind of fair in my criticisms. I wouldn't write something that I didn't like or that I didn't actually believe just to get a sort of score a cheap point or anything like that. There has to be some kind of, I have to feel comfortable with what I'm doing. Some politicians, maybe they don't like, don't like the scale. I mean, but most politicians sort of put up with it. And this sort of gets to the narcissism of many politicians because, I mean, I found that most would rather be written about rather than ignored. And, you know, and also, if I make fun of one politician in Westminster, I've probably made friends with 649 others because there's nothing that they like more than seeing one of their colleagues sort of having the piss taken.
Yeah.
Even from their own party?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, there is no kind of limit to sort of loyalty and all that. Maybe not.
Do you think you have the power to make or break a politician's career as well? I mean, you make them more relevant, but also make them characters, right? Like you May bot.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, with Theresa May, when she became Prime Minister immediately after Brexit, I thought, how am I going to sketch her? She is so boring. She has literally no distinguishing features. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe we can run with that as a thing, you know, make a virtue of how bad she is.
Yeah.
And then I kind of listened to her delivery, and I kind of thought, she sounds like 1980s faulty artificial intelligence. And so then I christened her the Maybot. And weirdly, that became her nickname throughout the British media.
Yeah.
Everybody started calling her the Maybot. Even her colleagues started calling her the Maybot. So I suppose that is a way in which kind of she became defined like that. She never could escape that. And I think one of the reasons she couldn't escape it was because there was a fundamental truth there, that she is curiously, emotionally detached.
Yeah.
And I had kind of alighted on that. And even, now, you can see her walking through Westminster and she literally doesn't seem to have any friends. But not that I care, to be honest.
So with some obscure, especially far-right politicians or movement, it feels like they benefit from any type of attention that they can get. How do you navigate that fine line of between critiquing the political agenda and unintentionally fueling it?
You have to be careful. I mean, you can't ignore these people. I mean, when I was sketching Boris Johnson, for instance, I was always very conscious of the fact that he wanted everything to be fun. He wanted people to like him. And, so if he felt that if he could make jokes, he could get everybody on side. So I made a conscious decision to sketch him seriously, to ignore the kind of the bluster and the humour, and in a way to act as an unpaid therapist for him, to kind of try and diagnose his, narcissism, his sociopathy, and, to kind of get to that, to get to the kind of fundamental vulnerability and the weakness of him. And again, that's something I try and do with Nigel Farage and other sort of politicians of the far right as well. I mean, I don't know. My knowledge of Dutch politics isn't sufficient, but there has been a mission creep in the UK, a kind of drift where the Tory party has gone ever further to the right, and there is a sort of now a kind of feeling that these parties, the Tory party and also Nigel Farage's Reform Party, they brand themselves as the centre right rather than the far right, to to try and become more acceptable, more wholesome. And again, I feel the need to remind readers that, this is, their centre-right, position is not a centre-right position, it is a far-right.
Yeah.
And that all the, the centre-right people who were in the Conservative Party have been kicked out. Boris Johnson threw about 30 of them out of the party in 2019 when he became Prime Minister.
Yeah. And satire often highlights the chaos in politics. Do you ever worry that you deepen the disillusionment with politics that we see right now?
No, I don't. I don't think I'm that powerful, to be honest. I think one of the things that I am really conscious of is not to become part of the establishment, if you like. I mean, in a way I am, because sketch writing has become integrated into the, parliamentary lobby, British media. And I don't want to become like an official court jester.
Yeah.
Because in a way, that would give politicians license to think, oh yes, we're terribly liberal, we can laugh at ourselves. And I kind of think, no, I don't want you just to sort of feel good about yourself. I want you to sort of read about, where you can read back yourself and think, yeah, well, maybe maybe there's something uncomfortable there for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so before we talk about your day-to-day work in the UK and in Westminster, let's have some audience questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Hi, thank you for being here. I was wondering actually if you brought up, for example, the events in Syria yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you, for example, feel that humor actually belongs in all political commentary, or is there a line that you think exists there? For example, when there's like personal tragedy involved, etc.
That's a very good question. There are definitely times when humor takes a back seat, and you have to, obviously you can think of the October the 7th attacks in Israel, and then the ongoing war in Gaza. Where I try and direct my attentions when I'm sketching those areas is into the self-importance of the politicians. Their kind of belief that what British politicians have to say on these things really matters, or is good, and we kind of know that it doesn't. The only people that maybe the Israeli government really listens to are the Americans. They're not going to kind of listen. British politicians can go over and over and over and over again about the need for a two-state solution. But, are Benjamin Netanyahu listening? Are Hamas listening? No, they're not at all. So this is where sort of British, the kind of political sort of, and I suspect it happens all around the world. Western democracies the same. And I kind of think my job is to sort of take them down a bit and just sort of introduce a reality check. Guys, you're just not that important.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Please raise your hand. In the back.
All right, so thank you for this lovely interview so far. I'm enjoying it very much. I know you have a very long career, and journalism has taken many forms over the course of years. My question to you is, how would you appreciate the transformation of journalism from print classic to digital, and how has that influenced maybe the way you write, how the audience receives the content? Is it better that now more people have access to it, or is it making journalism more saturated and less valuable?
That's a very big question. I mean, in terms of, yes, it is very much harder to get a voice out there. I mean, you have to, in a way, trust the media platform that you're going through, because there are a lot of bad faith actors out there. And, you know, even on, on Twitter, you can, I mean, it's a sort of, it's chaos out there. There are a whole lot of people who you don't necessarily know whether they're Russian bots, they're sort of outright American, or, you know, they are kind of, you know, it often feels like the sort of socially progressive voices are getting kind of drowned out ever since Elon Musk took over. And I mean, so you have to, you know, as a reader, you have to be quite cautious about where you take your news from there and go to sort of greater lengths to verify it. But I mean, I think in terms of digital or print, I mean, I think there is a process of democratization that's gone on. I mean, different voice, you know, I think a plurality of voices, you know, is generally a good idea. And it's definitely had a huge effect on how I write and, you know, the way that I operate. I mean, certainly when I started, as I said, there was no internet, there was no email, and, you know, if a piece didn't make it into the newspaper, it might as well not have existed. But now it can find a home on not everything The Guardian publishes in print appears, you know, not everything it publishes online appears in print. And I mean, I've completely readjusted my attitudes to it too, because initially I was kind of old school and felt like if it didn't appear in print, then digital was second best. But now I kind of think that the sketch, you know, the main definitive text is what appears online. Because very often usually appears within 2 hours of me filing it, and I can write it to the length that I want to write it. And The Guardian will let me do that because there are sort of really good analytics. They know exactly how many people are reading it every minute. So that's sort of page views. And they also know how deeply it's read, you know, how long people are reading it. Loads of news stories, people literally click on the page, you read the headline, maybe the first sentence, and then you click off because you kind of feel like you've got everything you need from it. And they've discovered that with my sketches, people generally stay to read to the end. So they've given me more and more, you know, they've given me longer word counts because I can justify it. I can say that people are there to the end. So digital has done me a favor.
Thank you for your question.
Let's talk UK politics. So the last decade in UK politics has been a bit of a roller coaster. 6 prime ministers, Brexit, Partygate, even lettuce outlasting Liz Truss. So to help us make sense of it all, we're going to do a quick fire round. So we'll throw out some moments or people, and we just want your first reaction. So no overthinking, just the first thing that comes to mind, okay?
Oh, Christ, this sounds terrifying. Well, let's go for it.
Okay, so first question. Boris or Liz, who was the biggest gift to satire? First thing.
Well, I would have to say Liz Truss.
Okay.
I kind of knew that she was gold because, with Boris, you know, I sort of knew what to expect. But with Liz Truss, I've got to, fantastic. At her leadership launch,
Yeah.
There was this wonderful moment when, in July 2022, she was the sort of hot favourite to become the new leader of the Tory party and hence the next Prime Minister. And she was on the first floor. We were all rammed into the first floor of this building in Westminster waiting for her. And the lobby was there. There were loads of Tory MPs because they were all hoping to get governmental jobs from her. And her best mate, Kwasi Kwarteng, who became the Chancellor briefly, got up to say, "I give you Liz Truss, our next Prime Minister." And we all kind of turned around. And nothing happened. She didn't appear. So he said it again. "I give you Liz Truss, our next Prime Minister." And then there was a little rattle at the door. And she couldn't open the door. And I kind of thought, this is a kind of gift to satire, really. And then she came and gave a 10-minute speech, which was sort of catatonically boring, and tried to leave by getting out the window. And you can't be. And then, of course, I mean, the first thing she did once she was elected was to kill the Queen. I mean, literally. I mean, she goes to see her. 2 days later, the Queen's dead. Nobody sees the Queen. So, you know, I mean, I don't go with natural causes. I kind of think. Anyway, I often write about her killing the Queen.
Yeah.
Because it gives me a lot of pleasure. And she hasn't, you know, again, I haven't been sued, so it might be true.
Oh. Brexit negotiations or Partygate, which was more like a sitcom?
I think Brexit negotiations, really. Well, I mean, Partygate was a kind of psychodrama sort of roller coaster, but the Brexit negotiations were, I mean, some of the time I would come over to Brussels to sketch what was sort of going on, and just to see the English government completely kind of outmaneuvered week after week. For those of us who voted Remain, there was something rather kind of, there was a lot of schadenfreude around there, I can tell you. I kind of loved it, really. And also they had no idea what they wanted. That was the kind of weird thing. I mean, during the Brexit referendum campaign, half of those who wanted to leave were saying it's all about sovereignty. Half were saying it's all about foreigners. Then there was half were saying, "Oh, we'll stay in the single market and customs union," and the other half were saying, "No, we've got to leave that." And nobody knew what was what.
Okay, so Boris Johnson getting stuck on a zip line or Boris Johnson hiding from reporters in a fridge?
Fridge, definitely. Fridge, because that was kind of really embarrassing. I mean, the zip wire was a stunt, and I'm sure that he was quite happy to be up there. But for those that don't know, I mean, Boris Johnson had been pursued by a news channel to try and give a sit-down television interview. And it was getting really near to the date of the general election, and he'd promised to do it. And he was cornered, he was sort of like doorstep. And he and his supporters sort of rushed into a side room to go and hide, and it turned out to be a refrigerator. And they were in there freezing to death for about 15 minutes. And it was just sort of summed up Boris Johnson's cowardice so absolutely perfectly.
Yeah. Nigel Farage or Dominique Cummings?
As what? I mean, Dominic Cummings is one of the weirdest, strangest men that I've ever come across. I mean, he's a man, he's sort of like an idiot savant, really. because he actually thinks that he's a bit of a genius, but everything he does turns to shit, really. And you know, and he spent his whole life really kind of backwriting his story to try and sort of present it as a sort of tremendous success.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's something kind of unhinged about him.
So, last question of this quickfire round. Of the last 6, who was your favorite prime minister? And you cannot say Keir Starmer.
Who was my favourite? Well, I think we've touched on her before. It was Liz Truss, I think. I mean, I kind of feel sorry that we only got 49 days of her, really. I was only just beginning to get started. Yeah. I mean, obviously, she was a disaster for the country, but then they all were. So you couldn't really have a kind of a favourite for, I mean, unless you're a kind of masochist, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so ending this quickfire round and going back into more serious issues, sadly, you really have to pay attention to everything that happens. We already talked about that. You're in Westminster each day. You have to keep up with the news. And many people get fatigued or stressed from seeing the news and take their distance, but you can't really do that. So how do you deal with having to always keep up with it?
Well, it helps that I'm a kind of politics nerd, so I am, you know, I am genuinely interested in sort of what is going on and the kind of little shifts in policy, little shifts in sort of, you know, the psychological dynamics of government that are kind of going on. I mean, sometimes sometimes it's just genuinely not obvious what you're going to do. I mean, usually on a Wednesday, I know what I'm going to do because it's Prime Minister's Questions, which is a 30-minute session in the House of Commons when, to start with, the leader of the opposition gets to ask the Prime Minister 6 questions. He usually doesn't answer, but, you know, there is this kind of stylized ritual going on, and then various backbenchers get to ask him questions too. So, you know, on a Wednesday, it's going to have to be something quite big to sort of kind of replace that. Other days, sometimes you don't know what you're going to sketch, and, you know, there might be a late press conference or statement in the House at, say, 5 o'clock. So you'll have spent the whole day just sort of waiting around. You'll go to the press conference and then, you know, you'll have an hour to write 1,000 words. And it's kind of never stops being terrifying, really.
And how has writing sketches changed compared to pre-Brexit times?
Well, they've become more and more a kind of sort of like a stenographer. I just kind of write down what people say, and it's just funny because, to start with, I mean, politics, you know, back in 2014 was in a way quite normal, but then starting with David Cameron winning the 2015 election, it suddenly became like a sort of a kind of roller coaster, and you couldn't believe that our politicians had sort of destroyed a country quite so badly, really. I mean, we're still kind of recovering, and I kind of feel that laughter is the only way through.
So, nearing the end of the interview already and getting also a bit more serious, it often feels like the world is getting more bizarre daily. Pointing out these absurdities has been a crucial part of your writing, and now the world feels more like a sketch itself sometimes. On top of that, written media seems to become less and less popular. Where in all this do you see the future of sketch writing?
Well, the first rule of journalism is never to make predictions, really. I will try. I mean, I don't know. I mean, sketch writing has been part of the kind of British fabric, or, you know, political fabric for 200 years. So I would be very sorry if it sort of stopped being that. I mean, I always kind of think of my job to be equal opportunities. I mean, just because I'm socially to the left, politically to the left, doesn't mean I'm going to give the Labour government an easy ride. I kind of feel it's important to hold the new government to the same standards that I held previous ones. Because otherwise you're not really a sketch writer, you're more of an activist.
Yeah.
And I do feel that some of my sketch writing colleagues for the more right-wing papers have, in recent years, become dangerously close to activists. I mean, in that they don't, you know, ignoring Partygate, ignoring kind of the dangers of Liz Truss, you know, and, you know, just sort of trying to rewrite Brexit as a success story. I kind of look on that as a huge degree of dishonesty.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been a kind of, unless you're a person who believes that really national sovereignty trumps everything, and it's worth taking a 4% hit to GDP to be able to say we are not going to sort of take any of our laws from Europe. But we do still, because, I mean, trade depends on having, you know, laws and regulations that are sort of a mutual, you know, that, you know, something that is kind of made in Germany, made in the Netherlands, you know, is of a sort of, so, you know, the same standard, you know, and is going to be compliant. I mean, we rely on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so to try and tear up all that kind of, all those rules has been a kind of profound waste of time.
Yeah. And ending on a lighter note, what is the best thing that could happen in UK politics to fuel your work?
Well, I mean, the trouble is that, I mean, what I'd really be hoping for is another disaster, really, because, you know, sketch writing is never better than at a sort of when something kind of disastrous, like when Rishi Sunak called the general election back in May this year, and he went out into Downing Street, and it was absolutely kind of tipping with rain, and, you know, he had no umbrella, and you could just see him there. His suit, you know, his expensive designer suit was getting completely trashed. He looked miserable, and it felt like a kind of cosmic joke was taking place. And so those are the kind of disasters you kind of live for, really. You know, and, you know, Keir Starmer has given, you know, he's made, you know, he hasn't made the best of starts, you know. There was a whole lot of talk about, you know, taking a whole load of freebies, Taylor Swift tickets, free suits, free glasses, then cutting the winter fuel allowance for old age pensioners, not really a sort of thing that you would expect a socialist government to be doing. You know, so you jump, I mean, but we're too early in the government to know, because again, electorates generally have quite a short memory. And if the cost of living crisis has disappeared, if everyone is feeling good about themselves, if the economy is growing a bit, in 4 years' time, none of this will matter. You know, the freebies will be long forgotten. It just won't be an issue. If the economy still, continues to tank, then I think it'll be a kind of problem. And I kind of worry because, when Tony Blair took over in 1997, the UK economy was on it was buoyant.
Yeah.
So he was able to do a whole lot of things. And I worry that the Tory government for the last 14 years have left the UK in such a desperate state that no politician can really turn it round without some serious policy that is going to come in for a whole lot of criticism as well, because everybody wants quick solutions.
Yeah.
And they want painless solutions, and there aren't necessarily any quick and painless solutions.
That's very true. Well, thank you very much, John Crace, for taking the time and joining us today. And thank you for listening. Now that Christmas is approaching, our next interviews will be in 2025. But if you can't get enough of room for discussion, you can, of course, watch all our interviews on YouTube. And we wish you a bearable exam week, Merry Christmas, and Guten Rutsch, and a big applause to John Crace.
Well, thank you for coming out. Thank you. Thank you.